Hi, my name's Alicia, and we need to talk about Jennifer's body. Jennifer's Body is a 2009 dark comedy horror film written by Diablo Cody, known for her Academy Award-winning film, Juno. Diablo Cody was riding a high after the success of Juno, and was given creative freedom to do whatever she wanted for her next film. And what she wanted was Jennifer's Body. Jennifer's Body centers around the themes of female rage, rape revenge, queer high school relationships, and mass reactions to trauma. The film follows Jennifer and Anita, or as Jennifer calls her, Needy, as best friends in high school together. Jennifer as the outgoing, popular cheerleader, and Needy as her studious, more reserved best friend. Jennifer takes them to a local bar to watch a small band play. Out of nowhere, the venue goes up in flames, killing and injuring tons of people. The band invites Jennifer to follow them into her van to safety. Needy's worried about this, but Jennifer goes anyways. They take her to a remote forest to sacrifice her to the devil in order to obtain fame. They wanted a virgin sacrifice, but our beloved Jennifer was not.
I'm not even a backdoor virgin.
This sacrifice results in Jennifer being possessed by a bloodthirsty demon, making her life source the blood of teenage boys.
And now I'm eating your boyfriend.
As Jennifer goes on her murderous tirade, killing boys and getting more lively and beautiful as she goes, it gets to the night of spring formal, when Jennifer goes after Needy's boyfriend for the kill. Anita fights back and ends up stabbing Jennifer in the heart. But not without leaving the scratch of a demon on Needy. This puts her in jail with powers of a demon, including strength and, curiously, levitation. She busts out of jail to avenge Jennifer's death and kills the man who cursed her. The film initially flopped commercially, earning only $6 million at domestic box offices. The film was long disgraced in the film industry, mostly because of the male reception of the film. In a 10-year anniversary interview about the film, Diablo Cody discussed what went wrong.
The studio had a very strong, unshakable belief that this movie needed to be marketed to young men.
The use of Megan Fox's body and allure to create marketing material, which she's the object rather than the subject, created the polar opposite expectation to what actually entails in the film.
I, had sent him this articulate defense of the film, and here's how it should be marketed. And I said, what specifically are you thinking? And he wrote back, Megan Fox hot.
The film didn't use Megan Fox as an object at all, which was new for what she had been experiencing in the industry. It completely twisted tropes of gender that we've learned through watching films just objectify women over and over again. The film showcased Jennifer in an active role, taking revenge against those who have caused her trauma, deterring from the constant trend of the passive feminine. The marketing team interviewed and paneled teen boys, but this film isn't for teen boys who want to see Megan Fox looking beautiful and Amanda and Megan making out. It can now be understood as a story of queer relationships in high school, sexual assault, violence against women, female friendships, and the reclamation of the power and autonomy over one's body. Men watching the film did not have a male hero character to associate themselves with, and thus did not enjoy what was presented. But women did. They found that hero in Needy, and even identified with Jennifer, and that's important change in cinema. The lived experiences of the viewer play a crucial role in how it's perceived and the impacts that presenting a female lead as a powerful and revenge-hungry killer can have on someone. Jennifer's Body personifies such narratives in a supernatural way. The film is not a story that brings pleasure to the viewer because it's about murderous rage, but rather because it's commentary on rape revenge and what trauma can do to a teenage girl. Post-assault Jennifer is literally living half dead as a revenge-hungry demon, where part of her soul has been taken away by the destructive forces of masculine greed. This research is not an attempt to empower women to embark on a killing spree in the name of revenge against the patriarchy. It's a review and observation of the representation of women in film and how the film subverts the male gaze. The male gaze is a term coined by Laura Mulvey to describe the manner in which female characters in film are sexualized and shot in a dehumanizing way that mimics the male and heterosexual perspective. Women are disproportionately physically exposed and feature many lingering shots that resemble pornography. Horror and pornography are the two genres specifically devoted to the arousal of bodily sensation. They exist solely to horrify and stimulate, not always respectively, and their ability to do so is the sole measure of their success. Women in horror often exist to please both of these categories. They are excessively sexualized and heavily brutalized. Jennifer's Body actively works to create characterizations that fight against the brutality and sexuality of women through revenge and putting agency and power into the woman. In doing this film subverts the male gaze in a way that may seem jarring to audiences because of their learned expectations of sexualized young women in film, and horror specifically. Thus, the research question to be employed within my work is, how do my male and female peers react to the representation of women in Jennifer's Body? To examine the way that women are presented in this film and how people react to it, I interviewed two of my peers, one male and one female, to see their expectations and thoughts on the film.
Hi, I'm Aiden.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline.
First, we discussed this clip from the film. It shows Jennifer right after she brutally murdered and eaten a football player from her school. We saw her in her full demon mode with an unhinged jaw, razor-sharp teeth, but then quickly, the screen cut to her naked, swimming through an empty lake. When she emerges from the lake, the camera lingers on her feet and ankles and shows a bit of her face, appearing as it might show her full naked body, but then the scene quickly shifts back to the scene of her murder, dropping right before the climax. So I asked my participants, what did you expect to see? And how did that make you feel?
I think at first, you see like Megan Fox swimming through and she comes out and you're like, oh, well, she's got no clothes on. And so I think that, naturally you kind of go like, oh, we're getting a nude scene going on here. And then, right before, any actual bits are exposed, it cuts away. And so you end up seeing something, entirely different than what you were expecting. At first it's kind of like, oh, that was weird. But then it's also, you kind of take a second, you're like, well, it was kind of weird to expect a nude scene in the middle of the movie at that point. Because there's nothing really leading up to it that would have indicated that that's what you're getting. And just right before she eats a man's, eats his stomach away. So it would be kind of weird, as a natural progression to expect that. But I think it's just one of those things you see Megan Fox and you're like, oh, well, this is just what you're getting.
At that time, Megan Fox as an icon in pop culture was so highly sexualized, especially because we do live under a patriarchal society, especially in media, and the way that she was represented that I was used to. I expected her to jump out of the lake and be, the up and down naked body scene, have more of an emphasis on her breasts and her butt and things that are more catered to the male gaze. So it definitely wasn't what I expected, but I was pleasantly surprised. I realized that the filmography that was used very carefully and very specifically to make us think something was going to go a certain way, and then it didn't.
Both participants discussed how they were disturbed by their own expectations to see Megan Fox's full naked body, even though it had no relevance to the plot. It's something trained in us, ingrained by the provenance of the male gaze. Another element of the male gaze is the depiction of the torture of women, showing physical brutality against them as a show of power. This film shows a very raw and violent scene where Jennifer is being sacrificed to the devil by a power-hungry man, where she's stabbed repeatedly until she dies. For this film, it was jarring to see her in this position. So I asked the participants, how do you feel about the violent scene that showed Jennifer being killed? And was it necessary for the context of this film?
I think it's justified. I think it's necessary. I think it kind of gets sort of if she had just been stabbed, it sort of misses out on sort of I don't know, I guess anti-misogynistic aspects of it or anti-rape culture aspects of the movie that are there and kind of are a bit of a pathway for why Jennifer is targeting boys or whatever it is. I think it makes more sense when you've seen sort of the brutality of the scene. And it kind of makes you feel more am I rooting for Jennifer here? Yeah, I guess I am. If she had just been stabbed or whatever, and you're like, oh, that's terrible, obviously, but it's not quite as, I don't know, that doesn't hit quite as hard, I guess.
I don't think it was necessarily needed, but I think including that scene in its light was extremely important to really try and show the audience the severity of the trauma that had occurred to her. I know in the scene where it's a bit earlier on, but it's leading up to that scene when Needy and Jen, it's flipping between them when the van door is closing. That one always brings me to tears because it's so real and it's so representative of abduction and trauma and rape, and when someone's taken away and you can see the danger and imminent fear in her face. And then the actual scene where she does get murdered, I think without it, the movie would lack a bit of that realness and the story wouldn't project as far as it did. And I know that even like Megan Fox herself in that scene went really far with it, and it's emotional for her to watch herself because of how real she went with it, and it's emotional for everyone. It's a girl getting murdered by a gang of men. It's not a pleasant scene to watch, but I think using it was so helpful to the thesis of the movie, because ultimately after she is brutally murdered, she becomes the boy-eating demon who is on the hunt for revenge because of what happened to her. And I think without that, the story wouldn't have resonated with people as much as it did, especially since people who are fans of the movie, and women in particular who are fond of it, resonate so hard with the movie because they see what happened to Jen and they can relate with their own trauma. And so then seeing her revenge arc and her going through the story to then get revenge on everyone who had hurt her, and then just boys in general, I feel like that scene is kind of the powerful point where people really, their emotions get tied into the story, and then you ultimately in the end want Jen to be the protagonist. But she's kind of an anti-hero. She's definitely both, but I think without the scene, the thesis of the film would not have been pushed as far as it did.
These responses from my participants was really, really interesting to me, and it provided a really interesting conclusion. Jacqueline, watching this as a woman, immediately sensed the danger at the beginning of the film when Jennifer stepped into the van with the band. As women, we understand the immediate danger of getting into a strange man's car. Rape, assault, murder is like the first thing that comes to mind. Whereas Aiden saw more of the danger after it had already happened, seeing the value of violence in the film. From this, I can also conclude that the scene also plays into the terms of rape culture. A woman isn't believed unless they can show direct evidence of their assault. The audience was only convinced of her assault once it was explicitly shown on screen. While women may have been able to pick it up beforehand, it appeared to me by my male peers that they didn't fully understand it until it was like explicitly shown, which was a really interesting point for me to look at, and I would like to explore that further. This was illuminating. As the male gaze is seemingly inescapable, Jennifer's body was ahead of its time and tried desperately to subvert it by using the male gaze to kind of like trick viewers into understanding it. Jennifer's Body is a cult classic for a reason. The film raises so many important questions and can garner so many important discussions that it can't just be discounted as some random bloody early 2000s comedy horror movie. It's so much more than that. So once again, I'm Alicia, and thank you so much for watching this analysis of the feminist cult classic, Jennifer's Body.